Congressman LaTourette, thanks for joining us in this new year.
Yep.
Welcome back.
Happy New Year.
Absolutely, and we actually have stuff to talk about. Things are happening here in Washington, D.C. again. Wanted to start off first with something that's been talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks, the vote on the Speaker of the House, which John Boehner won that vote, but in a little bit of a surprise, there were more Republicans who defected and voted for someone else, not named John Boehner, for Speaker. Talk to us a little bit about what happened.
Well, you know, the 20th Amendment of the Constitution says that the first Tuesday at noon of the new year is when the new Congress comes into session, which is what happened on Tuesday. And one of the first orders of business after everybody gets sworn in, it's an exciting day because a lot of people bring their families, a lot of kids, cute kids, wander in the hallway. But they moved to the election of the Speaker. In recent years, it's become a little trickier than it used to be. It's a pretty simple vote. I mean, if you're a Republican, you vote for the Republican. If you're a Democrat, you vote for the Democrat. But I can remember when I first came in my second term, Newt Gingrich was having some problems, and so a few people peeled off and voted for other people. It's sort of become a publicity stunt at this moment in time. And so you had members of both parties defect from voting for the nominee of their party. There were 3 Democrats, I think, but it was particularly acute on the Republican side, where we had this hell no caucus that we've talked about a lot of times that prevented things from getting done. Most of them tend to be junior members, backbenchers, not any household names, but associated with the far right of the party primarily. And they think it's, you know, it's up to them to speak out and vote for themselves. I mean, they nominated not Steve King, but Daniel Webster of Florida and a bunch of others. And so, yeah, between them they got 25 votes. But the difficulty is that you really need to ask yourself, and they need to ask themselves, first of all, you had a chance to elect the Republican nominee in the Republican conference. John Boehner was the choice. Why didn't you stick with the choice? And if you say, I didn't stick with the choice because, then the because needs to have an answer like, what was going to happen? Because the rule is that in order to become the Speaker, you have to get a majority of the votes of the people that are there and voting. Now, Tuesday also happened to be the date of Mario Cuomo's funeral, Governor Cuomo, up in New York, and so you had a bunch of Democrats who weren't there. If the Democrats had been there and voted presumably for Mrs. Pelosi, you would have gone to a second ballot. And you know, these folks need to say to themselves, so how does the Republican cause, in this case, get furthered? How does the country's cause get furthered by denying the majority party's choice the speakership? And it's a shame, you know, but Boehner, John Boehner, Speaker Boehner, has now, looks like he's taking kind of a tough approach. He refused to seat 2 people that voted against him, one that ran against him on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is known as the Speaker's Committee, and I think he's within his rights not to put people on the committee, his committee,
yeah,
that don't want him to be the Speaker. And there was a fellow from Texas who had a piece of legislation scheduled for this week, and apparently it's not going to happen.
Well, you know, I guess the question I was left thinking about was, if this is the opening of a new Congress where Republicans are in control of both chambers, and there's been a lot of talk about dysfunction in Washington, and Republicans ran, and people all across the country went and voted for Republicans, and they knew that by voting for Republican control of the House, they were going to have John Boehner as the Speaker. They knew by voting for Republican control of the Senate, Mitch McConnell was going to be the leader in the Senate. And here's this opportunity for Republicans to show we're getting ready to take over. And instead, you've got a handful of people who want to show just how dysfunctional we can be and should have a circular firing squad. And I mean, at the end of the day, is it just that we've got a growing number of folks here in the House, particularly, unfortunately, on the Republican side of the aisle, who just aren't interested at all in what's in the best interest of the party or the institution or the country, but really are about kind of the individual grandstanding?
Yeah, I think so. And performing for a small group within their districts, vocal, passionate, but a small group, and it doesn't bode well for what's going to happen in the next few months, because if they're willing to take this vote, which is symbolic, and vote against the Speaker, when he comes and asks them to vote for more substantive things, if they peel off, now the good news for the Speaker is he's got a bigger majority than last time, so he can lose 25. He can't lose 29. And so there's still a chance this stuff can get done, but this was not a good opening day.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It is.
So on to some more substantive things. The Keystone Pipeline. This has been something that Republicans have talked about a lot. It is something that's garnered bipartisan support before, but because of Democratic control in the Senate, it has never moved. Republicans are now in control of the Senate with a fairly sizable majority. Both chambers have said that they're going to move on the bill, and the president, I guess not surprisingly, has said he's likely to veto the bill.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this dynamic.
Well, the Republicans, if you remember one of our last get-togethers last year, Mitch McConnell signaled that this was going to be the sort of the first piece of business to get it to the president's desk. There are enough votes to pass it in the House, and there have been in the past. And now you have all 54 Republicans in the Senate, together with 6 Democrats, to hit the magic number of 60 to pass it in the Senate as well, and send it to the president for his signature. Now, his press person yesterday said that he was going to veto the legislation, which it's not surprising, but it is surprising, in that this thing has been studied 5 separate times by the president's State Department, and each time they've come back with the conclusion that there's nothing the matter with it. The other thing is, the president has a little bit of an uptick in popularity based upon the fact that the economy seems to be doing better. And one of the reasons the economy is doing better is that the cost of energy is way down. And so, I was in Ohio last week, and I paid $1.75 a gallon. I never thought I'd see $1.75 a gallon.
Did you think it was 20 years ago? That
I
you had
did.
some time warp?
I thought, am I driving my 1989 Oldsmobile Cutlass or what? But those things go hand in hand, and you can't say that we want to free ourselves of the influence of foreign oil and the stranglehold that puts upon our economy, and say we're going to produce our own energy and have it be cheaper, but not have a way to get it to market, which is what the pipeline is. So it's a little inconsistent, but it's not, if you look at some of the president's allies in the environmental community, I guess it's not horribly surprising. It's unfortunate. The real test will be, it'll be the first then challenge by the new Congress as to whether or not they can get to the magic numbers to override the president's veto. Very difficult.
And that's what I was just about to ask you. I mean, it seems hard to imagine that there's going to be any piece of legislation anytime soon where they'll actually have the numbers to override a veto. However, I got to believe that at least symbolically, this one might be in the ballpark. If because it has drawn bipartisan support before. Do you think we're going to be close where they're actually having a conversation? Could this happen?
Yes. So if you're at 60, are going to vote for the bill in the Senate now, you just got to get to 66, and I don't think that's beyond the pale. It's tough, but not beyond the pale. In the House, it's 40-something. And again, not ridiculous. I mean, there's 190 or whatever Democrats in the House, and so you just need to pick off 40 of them. And you have some of them, you have people from Texas, Democrats from Texas, that are going to be hard-pressed not to vote for it. You have Democrats from the West Virginia, Manchin and others. And so, conceivable, not likely, but I think it'll be something we can talk about.
It'll definitely be fun to watch.
It will be.
So what else are we going to be watching in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, January is always an exciting time at the beginning of a new Congress. So this week they're going through adopting the rules, electing the Speaker, debating some bills. In the coming weeks, both parties then go on what's called a retreat, sort of their separate corners where they map out what they see as their visions and strategies for this 114th Congress. And those are interesting discussions, because what comes out of that is that the leadership teams of both parties will have their marching orders that this is what we want to accomplish, or this is what we want to prevent from accomplishing. And so that'll be a good source of news in the coming weeks. Then, of course, at the end of the month, the president's invited up to Capitol Hill to give the State of the Union address. And that's always an exciting time on Capitol Hill for the president to come up and talk about his, what he thinks is going to happen and his vision. And then shortly after that, the president has a requirement to submit a budget, and then the House primarily has an obligation to begin the spending process. One thing that's going to happen more quickly than I thought, you remember last year that when they passed that big spending bill, the omnibus that we talked about, that had all of the bills but one, the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill, and they set a deadline for February. And I fully expected that why do it until you'd have to?
Right.
That they weren't going to do it until February. The word now is that they hope to have that bill written by the end of this week or early next week,
Wow.
and have it on the floor sometime in January, which would be a big deal. And that will set up not only the dynamic of cleaning up the last piece of business on the spending side from the last fiscal year, but that's where the Republicans signaled they're going to try and figure out what strategy they will employ to deal with the president's executive orders on immigration. And so that has the potential to be, for the first time in a long time, you have the potential to have some real solid discussions here in Washington on public policy. And it's going to be exciting to watch if it happens. And so it's going to be a good January.
Well, and just before we leave, I wanted to mention, I think a lot of folks would probably be surprised. You mentioned three big events, the State of the Union, the budget, and then the retreats. I think everybody out there knows about the budget. They all know about the State of the Union. I don't think as many people know about these retreats, but of those three, you could argue that the most influential in terms of policy as we move forward this year is going to be those retreats.
Absolutely, because primarily it's the Republican one you got to keep an eye on, not because they're more important, but they're the majority. And when the Democrats are the majority, they're the more important because the majority party sets the agenda, determines what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And these discussions, I mean, what happens at a retreat is that all of the members of each party sit in a conference room or a ballroom, and they debate what it is they want to do. And as a result, the framework for the budget for the United States will be developed at the Republican conference. And so issues is how much are we going to spend on defense? How much are we going to spend on public television? How much are we going to spend on whatever? Those will be all formulated in principle at these retreats. It's a big deal because once those marching orders are given, you're locked in. Now the public doesn't see that because it's not a piece of legislation,
right?
But it is the direction from the elected members of Congress in that party, and it's going to happen.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of both of these retreats.
Yep.
We look forward to talking to you about it over the next couple of weeks.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.